Hi, I'm Mark Unger, producer of Roundtable. Because we find this presentation so special, we really would like for you to see this. Please watch.
Welcome to Single Shot at Manhattan Neighborhood Network Roundtable. Today we will be talking about impact of photography on our society and how photography helps us to understand ourselves, to understand the peculiar groups that exist within our humanity, the special interests and special areas of our existence. We have in our studio a brilliant photographer, Lilian Caruana.
Caruana, that's okay.
Who devoted her art, beautiful photographic work to marginalized groups of the society, whether by choice or by the situation in which they are. And one of her biggest projects was Rebels, which ended up to be a beautiful book of photograph of punks of New York from 80s, I believe, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So can you tell me a little bit more about this project? Hello, Lilian. Thank you for coming. And
thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. In the 1980s, I moved to the East Village because it was just cheaper to live there. And I would see it was a very creative time for the East Village. I mean, there were galleries, there were music, there were poetry readings, there was all kinds of activities. So it was very exciting being there. Mm-hmm. But then I also would see these odd-looking people dressed in, leather and tattoos and body metal and mohawks, and I didn't know who they were or what they were about. So I just wanted to find out about them. I became curious, and anthropology was my major in college. So I'm very interested in cultures, and so I decided to start, photographing them and asking them if I could photograph them. And so I started approaching them on the street, and that was very daunting because they're kind of scary looking. I mean, I hadn't lived in New York for about 10 years. I had lived in Chicago and in Omaha and Texas. So I wasn't familiar with the whole scene anymore. And so they looked scary, but when I started talking to them, they became very open to me. And I found out that they were musicians, many of them. So I started hanging around in the clubs and photographing them in the clubs and on the street. And one day in one of the clubs, I met Eric, who didn't want me to photograph him there because it was the Pyramid Club. And he said, mm-hmm. This isn't my hangout. If you want to photograph me, come to where I live. And so that's how I got introduced to their squats. And they kind of welcomed me after a point. I was persistent enough, I hung out, and they became, friendly and invited me, and I would, take them out for lunch sometimes or coffee. I invited them to my house. So I became like a friend. And they felt comfortable talking to me, and they opened up. I mean, it's what every photographer dreams of, that you become invisible when you're there, that you're not noticed, so
Absolutely.
That you can keep photographing.
And all this resulted in the book.
Yeah,
Rebels.
it was a 3-year project. Mostly, not so much in the winter. They were hard to find in the winter. the other seasons, I would just go there and, you know, see who was around. And there was a lot of turnaround because, you know, people would come from other places, from England, and would crash there. So there would be a lot of different people. And then there were always the kids outside CBGBs, which came from everywhere, you know, from Queens or New Jersey or the suburbs, but dressed like that and you know, followed the ethos of.
So, as I understand, the book contains photos of the punks and skinheads. Was that two separate groups, or it was just one homogenic society that just had different angles to it?
Yeah, the punks and the skinheads were mostly homogenous. They were hardcore, because that's what the music was, and what they had in common was that they were anti-establishment. They didn't like the values of society. They were very political against, you know, this was the Reagan era, and they were very much against that. They also were looking for authenticity. You know, they felt that society was corrupt. They wanted to shock people. They did. You know, they showed themselves just the opposite of whatever culture was. So they had the different values. You know, so they wanted to shock people by the clothes they wore, by their stance, by their body language. And that was just a way to kind of get attention or just show how different they were, how they didn't want any part of mainstream society. But how they were different was that, so they hung around the same clubs, they liked the same music, they lived, many of them together. Some punks would have boyfriends that were skinheads or vice versa. How they were different was mostly, I think the punks were mostly very artistic, very more anarchistic. You know, they would try anything. Their clothes, their style was very, very whatever they wanted. The skinheads instead had a uniform. They wore suspenders and jeans and boots, and they had shaved heads. You know, even the girls had shaved heads. So, and they were more nationalistic. They were more political in that way. But I didn't find, among the ones I knew, the anti-Semitism, you know, that you often associate with the skinheads.
Yeah, that's actually was my next question. That what a common person knows about this movement, they practically allied with the Nazi movement in many ways. Again, that's what is the word on the streets. So you sound like the ideology of the group of people you was documenting was at least a little bit different from what they known to be.
Yeah, some of them, you know, I'm not whitewashing. Some of them may have been. You know, I'm just from my own experience of them. But some of them were Hare Krishnas. They were vegetarians. They, yeah, I think they were more complex. There's one guy who, I think he was agnostic front guy. His grandmother was Italian. He lived in Little Italy, and his grandmother would make, on Sundays, which was the matinees, his grandmother would make big pasta dinners and invite all the kids, the skinheads, there for pasta. So it's kind of, it's more complex than what we think. Yeah.
So, in terms of working photographically with this group, did you actually feel more like you working as a scientist? Again, you have this anthropology background that led you to start the project to begin with. Basically, was trying to document what you see or trying to reveal something in this society that is of interest and of your personal focus? Basically, was you leading the photographs in a specific way, or it was just approaching it from a journalistic point of view?
Well, I didn't set up any of the photographs, but I think, well, the anthropology came with my interest in the topic, in the subject. But other than that, I think it was all just my relationship with them, because I think if somebody else had been in that position, they would have taken totally different pictures.
Absolutely.
But they, I was very lucky to have been, my very first teacher was W. Eugene Smith, and he had taught us to live with people, to get to know them.
Okay, we're back after this small break, and we was talking about taking your personal angle or looking at them scientifically just as a subject. So
Yeah, I learned to work with, to approach a project by doing research and by hanging around and getting to know people, getting close, and developing a rapport. And you know, with that understanding, then you can take more intimate photographs. You know, there's trust, and you can get a little deeper.
So you actually managed to relate to people and reflect it in a photo.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the results are definitely astonishing.
Thank you.
So as we discovered, the New York skinheads and punks of 80s was actually much more gentle and much more oriented on finding the meaning of life than on being actually aggressive. But as I know, you had a series of photographs also of New York group that was far more dangerous. Actually, one of the big gangs of New York, I believe Southern Manhattan, right?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
how did that go about?
It came about because actually a friend of mine met somebody who turned out to be the leader of this gang, the Savage Nomads. And she thought I might be interested in meeting with him because she knows that I'm interested in subcultures. So I did. I met him at a pizzeria, and he was very nice to talk to. I felt trust with him. But I was also, it was a period of my time where I was kind of interested in evil, why people, what happens to people when they do evil, what makes them do it. And so I was just kind of in that frame of mind, and I thought this would be interesting thing to do. So I agreed to go there, and I went with a writer from a magazine, and we, you know, I photographed while he interviewed, and so one of the things that was most interesting to me, and I don't know if you'll see it on the screen, was that they had an American Express card that said Savage Nomads. It was really funny.
Customized.
Yes. Yeah.
That's cute.
Yeah. I mean, I guess American Express thought they were a business called Savage Nomads, but that's what they used it. So, yeah, so this was in the South Bronx, and they, you know, I photographed them. One of the leader was, I photographed him with his Uzi submachine gun, I think that's what they're called.
Uzi.
Uzi,
Yes.
yeah.
One of the small Israeli ones.
Yeah, yeah. So that, and I just photographed them in their environment, and then did that for a couple of weeks, you know, 2 days actually, over 2 week time, and then they were arrested, and we couldn't continue the project. But I found, and this is so interesting. I mean, these were people who did terrible things, but I think what happens is that when people bond with people, and if they feel that you're somehow connected with them in some way, they'll protect you, and that's how I felt there. In fact, when I had to leave early one day, and the leader said to me, call me up when you get there so that I know you got there safe. So that was very surprising.
Well, clan mentality. That's
yeah,
pretty
it's just
typical for all organized crime groups.
It's like if yeah.
So just for my curiosity, you said that one of the motives to actually document that group of individuals was to understand why people do evil. So did you find an answer to the eternal question, at least some form of it? I'm really interested to hear that.
No, no, I didn't exactly, but I think what happens is that people are put in a situation where, I mean, these same people, if they had a different kind of life, might have done something else, but they're in a situation where it's a rough life, and they get used to, you know, violence, and so they get inured to it. That's what I thought. But I saw humanity there when, you know, when he was interested in my welfare, and I think that's, so there's something still good in that person.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
People are far more complicated than
Yeah.
just an artist's rendering of people. Well, as I understand, besides one of the most dangerous and aggressive groups of New York population, you have a series which is very recent about far more peaceful group of marginalized New Yorkers, and they marginalized not because of not by the choice, like the ones we was talking before, but because of the situation in their life. They moved in America and didn't get adjusted well enough either yet, or in some cases, I'm also coming from immigrant community, and in some cases immigrants, remaining immigrants living in their own small societies for their own life. So as I understand, he was documenting these groups of individuals as well, both on Coney Island, which is probably a center of all immigration right now, just like Ellis Island used to be, and as in form of photographing families of Italian musicians, I believe, correct?
Yeah, mostly Italian musicians, but yes. Coney Island, I love Coney Island because everybody belongs in Coney Island. You can be, you know, you can be immigrant from anywhere. You can be, you know, somebody that handles snakes, or eccentric people, musicians, dancers. Everybody's accepted there. Everybody is. It's a wonderful place. And it was, as it came as an immigrant here, Coney Island was the first beach I ever went to, you know, when I first came here. So it's, it has a lot of positive feelings for me. But, today it's a place where immigrants from all over the world come. You see everybody. You see women, Muslim women, swimming with their, with fully clothed, and Hasidic Jews come there. I think in October, and they kind of take over the whole place, and just all kinds of people, and it's and everybody's happy, and they like being photographed, and it's wonderful.
Well, it is indeed a special talent to make everybody to love being photographed. A lot of photographers actually complain about quite the contrary, but we'll probably get back to this a little later. I wanted to ask you about another project, which in a way is similar to project of Immigrants to America, but in the other aspect is 180 degrees different. I know that you have this series of photographs of population of Italian Alps who basically are immigrants in their own country. So
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about it? It's truly fascinating project and truly fascinating community.
Yes, yeah. Well, I was born in the Italian Alps, and it's a bicultural area. It's called the Tyrol, and it used to belong to the Austrians before World War I, and then the Italians took over. And most of the Austrians have remained in the mountains as farmers, and in the city, it's mostly the Italians. So, so even though they're Italian citizens, most of them have held on to their culture. They feel colonized. They have felt colonized, and very many of them don't speak Italian. They just speak German. So their clothing, their way of life remains very traditional.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
Fascinating. It's indeed a beautiful series. And we'll get back. Okay, this is the last section of our today's conversation, and traditionally we're asking our guests for an advice, and there is something very peculiar about Lilian. As I said before, a lot of photographers complaining about people being non-cooperative and not friendly when they have camera pointed at them, and it's a recent development. Before, people was friendly because camera was novelty, and getting an extra picture in your life was a huge pleasure, but at some point, actually around 70s, it started to change. They became to be commonplace, and people started to react rather unfriendly. So I wanted to ask Lilian for her advice, how you actually befriend sometimes dangerous, non-cooperative, and in many ways unfriendly potential subject, and make a person to actually trust you and enjoy being photographed.
Well, I think that the fact that I'm shy helps. I think people don't feel threatened by me. You know, I just, you know, I approach people. I ask you often. I will ask, not always, if I can photograph them, and usually people are fine. But also, I tend to do projects, so I go back and back again. So well, not with the Coney Island. I only meet people once, but generally, I think just the way that you approach people, the energy that they feel. You know, I feel that I always show trust. Even when I was photographing the punks, I never was careful about my cameras. I would just leave them there, you know, or my equipment. And the same with the gangs. I never, you know, I can't photograph people if I don't trust them. So, and I'm generally a trusting person anyway. But so I think they get that about me, that I trust them and I'm interested in them. I want to learn about them. And I respect them, and I want to tell their story, or I want to tell them something about them. So I think they pick up the respect, and the interest.
Trust, not threatening, and respect.
Yes.
Well, sounds like a very good recipe. So
it's worked so far.
Just
not that I never get turned down. I mean, I do. You know, there are times, you know, that people don't want to be photographed, and that's fine.
Oh, you mentioned one of them when this gentleman said it's not his hangout.
Yes, that's right.
But again, it led you to actually, as I understand, the most interesting and the most intimate part of the project. Single shot, Lilian Caruana, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's really was beautiful conversation, and I'm wishing you good luck with your Coney Island project, as I understand it's ongoing.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lilian.
I hope you found that worth watching as much as I did. I'm Mark Unger for Roundtable. Thanks for watching.